The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in June 2022. And I'd like to take up a koan today as a way of helping you work towards awakening. This koan happens to be in the Mumon koan, which is one of the primary collections in Zen, in the Zen tradition of koan work. It's the most popular one, and the other most popular one is the Heikigan Roku, or the Blue Cliff Record. The Mumon koan has been spoken of many, many times by various different teachers and expounded in the different koans. And in our system of koans, it's after one has gone through a breakthrough koan sufficiently to be able to work on subsequent koans, then one goes through several what are called preliminary koans. And then one enters into working on the Mumon koan, and we work from the beginning to the end. There are various different ways to work on koans. Different teachers teach them in different ways depending on their lineage. And in some lineages, the koans are taught in what seems like a random order, but they aren't a random order, because the koans all point to some aspect of reality, and doing them in a more seemingly random order results in developing certain aspects of our awareness, our understanding, sort of by group. Whereas with going through them from 1 to 48 in the case of the Mumon koan, or 1 to 100 in the case of the Heikigan Roku, and then there are other koan collections that we also teach here, but these are the primary ones because they're the first ones that one goes through. Then one has a chance to work through different aspects of awakening. Awakening, when we have a Kensho experience, it's not like it's the ultimate seeing into the true nature of mind, of life, of death. It is usually a limited insight, and to do the subsequent koans helps to deepen and expand that insight, which is absolutely vital. It's very easy to get caught in a lopsided version of reality. And in order to help prevent that, teachers teach a whole range of koans. There are the number that is spoken of is 1,780. 1,780 koans. That's a lot. It takes a while to get through them, actually, because they're not. It's exceedingly rare that a person will take up a koan and pass it the first time one goes before the teacher. Usually it takes several attempts, particularly in the early years of working on subsequent koans, because we have to really explore the various different nuances, just as we are exploring the various nuances of reality, or of our opening to reality. It's important to be able to do that. In Western culture, there are two main reasons, I should say, why people are not able to readily focus and pay attention in ongoing ways, which is essential for Zen practice. The first is that it is endemic that we have flashing screens. Boy, if you're in Japan, it's even worse. But in America, rare is the home that doesn't have a television on a good part of the time. I feel like my kids were greatly benefited by growing up outside the United States in remote countries where there was no television in Myanmar, and in Thailand, on occasion in certain villages, because we were not in Bangkok, in certain villages there would be one television set in a central location in the village, and people would gather around it to watch whatever was played on the television set. Televisions, movies cause our minds, our brains, to grow accustomed to immediate change and a lack of being able to focus and attend in a longer period of time. And this is of great detriment to us in modern society, in any society. Although in ancient societies there was no television, so it wasn't a problem. And it also comes down to roost in our Zen practice as well. We sit in the Zendo trying mightily to focus our minds on the experience of breathing out and extending the out-breath. And extending the out-breath helps a great deal with counteracting this brain training that we've undergone by being constantly exposed to flashing screens. The other main reason why this can happen is that when we have undergone painful experiences growing up, the only way we understand how to deal with them is to try to shut them out. And we shut them out by kind of flying above life, present enough that we usually, but not always, can function. There are actually many car accidents that happen because people are not paying attention to what's happening around them. And so they rear end vehicles, or they start off at traffic lights or go through traffic lights. It's almost endemic in Santa Fe for people to run red lights. And so there are accidents. And then if we really are checking out, we do kind of stupid things, like in the interest of investigating our cell phones, we walk off the edge of the dock because we're not paying attention to where we're walking. So we have an uphill road to travel often when we come to Zen practice. It's rare that somebody comes to Zen practice out of a place of deep presence. But we can train our mind. This is one of the wonderful things about brain plasticity. You can change it. And change it is exceedingly important. If we're to come to awakening, have a kensho, and be able to work on subsequent koans, we have to learn how to focus in an ongoing way to maintain a focus. We get bored in our practice. We get frustrated in our practice. We invent all kinds of wonderful things to think about or get involved in to distract ourselves from this doing one thing. But it is amazing how positive our life can be come if we learn to focus in an ongoing way. It's vital. It's vital for our own lives. It's vital for safety. How many people have been killed when they weren't paying attention to where they were walking or driving? So I want to urge you to really pay attention to focusing, because it is far more important than we're taught. And with the koans, as I said, because we are so accustomed to relatively limited focus, when we do have a kensho experience, it's often not terribly deep. It is deep enough to be able to work on subsequent koans. There is a definite difference in our ability to perceive. But then we use the koans to expand our awareness. And in our system here, we start with a breakthrough koan, of which there are several. The traditional one is the koan mu, which, interestingly enough, Hakuin did not find was as effective as the sound of one hand. We all know what two hands clapping sounds like, but what is the sound of one hand? Does one hand make a sound? And then there is one's face before one's parents were born. And that, you've heard before, comes out of the experience of the sixth patriarch with the monk who was pursuing him. And then the more modern version of that is, who am I? And what we like to use here is a personal koan. In other words, we usually come to practice with some felt need. There's something bothering us. For example, with Roshi Kapleau, it was, why is there suffering in the world? That was kind of what it was for the Buddha as well. And for other people, there are other things. Why is my life in turmoil? Why am I unhappy? But probably one of the most effective ones is this sense that there is something just beyond our reach that is vital to return to. So we work on a subsequent koan often for years. I know someone who used to come regularly. Every Sunday morning he was at the Rochester Zen Center. He lived in Buffalo, which was an hour drive away on the freeway, and he was always there. He was an art teacher, so summers he was at every sesshin as well. It took him 20 years before he had a breakthrough. But he told me once, he said, after he'd been practicing for 13 years, he went into Doksan and was saying to Roshi Kapleau, I've been practicing for 13 years. I haven't broken through yet. And Roshi said to him, 13 years, 30 years. And all of a sudden it didn't matter to him anymore. But when he did break through at 20 years, it was deep. Jean Lowe, who was Albert Lowe's wife, Albert and Jean were both training at the Rochester Zen Center when I was. Albert had come to Zen out of pervasive anxiety. He had been an executive with Toronto, is it Light and Gas Company, and he was a personnel manager and had to do a fair amount of travel as a result, and he had panic attacks traveling. And he finally retired early, and he and his wife, Jean, who also practiced Zen, came to live and practice full-time at the Rochester Zen Center. He eventually became a Zen teacher and was the head of the Montreal Zen Center, and eventually died in his 80s. After writing books, you may know some of his books. I can't remember the name of them at this point, but if you Google him, Albert Lowe, you'll find a number of books by him. I think Zen and the Art of Management or something of that ilk was one of his books. At any rate, Jean had been practicing for 14 years and still hadn't had a Kensho experience, which bothered her a great deal. It bothered any of us at Rochester Zen Center if we hadn't broken through. And at one point, Roshi had her give a Zendo talk. And during that talk, she said in great anguish, "Can't somebody push my button?" But just a few weeks later, at a sesshin that we were both at, she went up to Doksan. She came down from Doksan, got back on her seat, and said out loud, which was rather unusual in the Zendo in the middle of sesshin, "Only 14 years. Only 14 years." So clearly she had had a Kensho experience. It can take however long it takes. It took Joshu 30 years. But then he broke through deeply enough. And also, it needs to be said again and again and again that one Kensho is not sufficient. We work on koans. On our breakthrough koan, we have a breakthrough. And then we continue to work and continue to work and continue to work and continue to work. And through that ongoing work, we gain greater insight even to the depth of more Kensho experiences. And you've heard it said that Hakuin, the great Zen master Hakuin, who single-handedly resurrected a moribund Rinzai Zen practice in Japan, and through whose lineage all Rinzai Zen temples now trace their history, had 19 Kensho experiences, that is, major awakening experiences, and countless minor ones. That is our model. So after the breakthrough koan and the preliminary koans that follow that, then there is the Mumon koan, 48 koans, the Hekigan Roku, 100 koans. Then we go on from there. The Rinzai Roku, the Katoshu, which is the only Japanese collection of koans. These others are Chinese. And various other koans that don't fit into any other category. And then also what are known as the, basically the ethical koans, the Juju Kinkai, the koans that have to do with deep, profound understanding of our behavior. And they are not what you would think, because it's not simple. So there are many, many koans, and most people don't end up going through all of them by any means. It's rare. But perhaps you will. I wouldn't think that you wouldn't. It's all up to you. So this koan that I was going to bring up is in the Mumonkan. It's case number 19, and it's called Ordinary Mind is the Tao. Now, the Tao is an ancient word. It predates the entry of Buddhism into China, and it is a Chinese word. And it refers to the way. It also refers to the ultimate truth of Zen. And in this case, it is the ultimate truth of Zen. So the koan reads, Joshu, who was a young man at the time, asked Nansen, what is Tao? In other words, what is the absolute truth of Zen? What is the most profound truth of the universe? And Nansen answered, ordinary mind is the Tao. Then, should we direct ourselves toward it or not? Asked Joshu. If you try to direct yourself toward it, you go away from it, answered Nansen. And then Joshu continued, if you do not try, how can you know that it is Tao? And Nansen replied, Tao does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing is illusion, not knowing is blankness. If you really attain to Tao of no doubt, it is like the great void, so vast and boundless. How then can there be right and wrong in the Tao? And at these words, Joshu had an awakening experience. So what is it? It is ordinary mind, but what is ordinary mind? And here we can go to Huangpo Obaku, who was Rinzai's teacher way back in China. And this is what he says. All Buddhas and ordinary beings are nothing but the one mind. This mind is beginningless and endless, unborn and indestructible. It has no color or shape, neither exists nor doesn't exist, isn't old or young, long or short, large or small, since it transcends all limits, names, and comparisons. It is what you see in front of you. Start to think about it, and immediately you're mistaken. It is like the boundless void, which can not be fathomed or measured. The one mind is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between Buddha and ordinary beings, except that ordinary beings are attached to form and thus seek for Buddha outside themselves. By this very seeking, they lose it, which is what what Nansen was referring to. Since they are using Buddha to seek Buddha, using mind to seek mind, even if they continue for 1,000,000 eons, they will never be able to find it. They don't know that all they have to do is put a stop to conceptual thinking, and the Buddha will appear before them, because the mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living beings. It is not any less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor any greater for being manifested in Buddhas. But putting a stop to thinking is not like stopping thinking. It's very important to recognize that. Putting a stop to thinking is as you extend the out-breath, feeling intimately the energies in your body as you do that. Aware of the quality of light in the room, the quality of air in the room. If there's a truck going by on the highway, you're aware of that sound. The boo barks, you're aware of that bark. But that's not the main focus. The main focus is the interior experience of breathing out along with the openness to possibility that there is something precious that will be revealed to you as part of that. If you persist long enough, if you reach far enough, then you will recognize that ordinary mind is the Buddha. And ordinary mind cannot be grasped, cannot be described, cannot be hung on to, is limitless, and yet has the potential for all things. Just like what it says in the scroll behind us. Out of not one thing arise the 10,000 things. I don't like the word void because it sounds like nothing. And that's not what it is. It's infinite potential. So what we could say out of not one thing, we could say out of infinite potential arise the 10,000 things. And when the karma for those 10,000 things, or any one of those 10,000 things, has been used up, then it dissolves back into that infinite potential. And that is everything. This building, the tons, all of us sitting on the tons, the truck outside, boo barking, Oslo, the clouds in the sky, the quality of air, everything. Everything is your own mind. So, I hope this will help you get intimately curious, because that is what is called for, to be most curious about this and keep reaching, because if you do that, you will find it, or at least the edge of it, and then you need to keep exploring further. And the koans can work with that as well. So, this is our practice. And the further we go, initially it's difficult. In fact, Mitra-roshi is famous for saying the first 10 years are really difficult. The next 10 years are more difficult yet. And then it gets easy. I wouldn't have said it in those terms particularly. I would have said the first 4 or 5 years were excruciating in my case. And then it changed. So you're not condemned to a lifetime of struggle. As Ajahn Chah said, there are 2 kinds of suffering. There's temporary suffering, the suffering you go through as you're working on your practice, which ultimately gives way to awakening, if you persist. And then things change. And then there's the permanent suffering that happens if you don't practice. So it's really a gift to all of us that each one of you has chosen to do this sesshin and to practice, because your zazen supports all of us, and it's so heartening to see all of you working to become liberated for the benefit of all beings. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. And we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. Thank you for listening.